Okay, good afternoon. I want to introduce you Professor Reimer Lobenberg. Professor Reimer Lobenberg got an award of leadership in Canadian pharmaceutical science. Usually they bestowed upon an individual who has demonstrated leadership in advancing the cause of pharmaceutical research and development in Canada. Professor Reimer Lobenberg received a Bachelor of Science degree in pharmacy from Johannes Gutenberg University, Mainz, Germany, and a PhD pharmaceuticals from Johann Wolfgang Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany. He joined the University of Alberta 2000, and he's the founder and director of the Drug Development and Innovation Center, Faculty of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences. I want to share with you the awards that Professor received recently. And on top of that, Professor Reimer is, the responsible for our dual degree. I think one of the most active dual degree in our faculty. So this is very, very important. And Professor Reimer, we just received, we just upgrade our grade with CAPIS, and for sure, thanks to you, okay? Because our dual degree makes total difference, it is something that we have to praise. And this is for us something very important. I want to share you my screen, I don't know if you can see it. Okay, okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So Professor Reimer Lobenberg receives this leadership recently. It was in June, okay? In the end of June, he receives this leadership award from the Canadian Society of Pharmaceutical Sciences. In the top of that, the age index of Professor Reimer is skyrocketed, okay? It's above 40. And I think the best of all, he's our friend. He's my friend, but he's a friend of our faculty. He used to help us a lot in all ways you can imagine, okay? So I'm very pleased, and thank you, Professor Reimer. Thank you for everything. Thank you for this decade. It was very productive, and I hope the next decade will be even better, okay? Please, Professor Reimer, you can begin your lecture.
Yeah. Dr. Chakra, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Good afternoon to Sao Paulo. I try to share now my screen. Share window. Let's see if this works. Yep. Can you see my screen now? Oops. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, Reimer, yes.
Okay, good. Okay. So today I will talk about cannabis, from a traditional to a forbidden and now medical plant. And first of all, I want to show you where I'm sitting at the moment. I'm sitting in the Kids building in Edmonton. Yeah, this is summer, the 2 days we have of summer probably. And otherwise we have a lot of winter here in Canada, as Professor Chakra knows. Here very quickly, a little view into our lab. We lately upgraded our lab with a lot of new instruments, so 2 state-of-the-art HPLC systems and a fully automated dissolution system, and then environmental chambers to make stability studies. So we do a lot of clinical trial material production in our center, and are quite active with clinical trials, and that hopefully also advancing knowledge in pharmaceutical sciences. Now to the topic of today. It was in October 17th, 2018, when cannabis got legal in Canada, and everybody thought then North America will look like this, Canada in smoke. and in the US, no smoke, but it was not totally like that. So what happened in Canada? The Canadian government decided to decriminalize cannabis use, and I had a controlled substance license under which cannabis was regulated. It was originally a controlled substance, and then they said, okay, we take this out, we make a totally new legislation out of it, and then they made out of one controlled substance licenses 6 different licenses for growing cannabis, making cannabis products, selling cannabis products, testing cannabis products, or doing research with cannabis products. Oops, what happened here? No, I did just something which, no, ignore, okay. So, and I have at the moment a cannabis license to do research and testing. We were one of the first labs which were allowed to test cannabis. When you want to test cannabis, you need quite sophisticated instruments. Here is an LC-MS machine, because they made a lot of requirements, and when we bought the machine first, Canada had not decided on all the standards, and suddenly for the pesticides analysis, they increased the sensitivity for most of the pesticides by factor 100, and then we had to return the machine and get a new one because the machine was not even sensitive enough. So governments, they have sometimes interesting ways to operate. Now to cannabis by itself. Cannabis has a long history. We can trace it down for 6,000 years ago in China. They like cannabis because of the fibers. They could make ropes, textiles, and also the first papers. The nutritional seeds were very commonly used. Also, the oil out of it was used for lamps. And of course, it was used as a medicine and for recreational ceremonies. In Canada, it was a little bit different. Canada is not that old like China. So they began and looked into opium and regulating opium in the early 1900s. And then they had legislation about opium, morphine, and cocaine. And then one day they just threw cannabis into the same coffin and said, don't touch it, it's not good for you. And at this time point, we had really no idea of the mechanism of action of these molecules. And it took then till 2018, so nearly 100 years, till probably science was consulted again, and the politicians decided to legalize cannabis. And I will come to this point a little bit later. What happened in the United States? In the 1972, this was under Nixon, they decided we will just put it into the category Schedule 1. These drugs have no medical use whatsoever and a high potential for abuse. And the science at this time point, recommended the government to say legalize marijuana. But Nixon said no and put it on Schedule 1. And a little bit later, in 1988, came a very interesting assessment from the US government, from the Drug Enforcement Agency. A lawyer wrote that marijuana is far safer than many foods we commonly consume. For example, eating 10 raw potatoes can result in a toxic response. It is physically impossible to eat enough marijuana to induce death. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. Remember that. That's the US government who had put it or said earlier to cannabis, has no medical use and high potential for abuse. When we now look into science, where cannabis was investigated and papers coming out, publications here over the years for different indications like cancer, clinical trials, neurological disorders. So in the 2010, 2015 on, we saw really a huge increase. And this is the paper we wrote in 2019 about phytocannabinoids and their metabolites and biological markers, and there we reviewed these things. This is also a little bit older statistics. Where it began was more locally. For example, United States, several states voted for that cannabis was legal. Interesting, also the District of Columbia, where all the politicians are, decided they want to allow cannabis use, but till today, in the United States, even if it is in a state legal, federally, it is not legal. And also in Europe, we had certain countries which legalized it early, and Uruguay also had it legalized very early. I don't know now exactly what happens in Brazil. If you have, I think you also legalized it. When the legalization came in 2018, here's the statistics from Canada. We had only 6 growers in Alberta, and a year later, it exploded. And this was still when a lot of money was invested into cannabis because everybody thought this is the next gold rush. But nowadays, many of these facilities closed again because the gold rush didn't happen. Cannabis is a medical plant and can be used recreationally, and that's it. There were not much advancements in science, I would say. The only thing which came on the market was one product, and I will come to this a little bit later. Here's some other statistics. This was from 2016 when it was still illegal to have cannabis. So British Columbia is known was known historically to have huge grow operations, illegal grow operations for cannabis. And here in Canada, how many people had possession of cannabis and how many more had it in British Columbia? So nearly double of the people. And cannabis, before it was legalized, was and is probably worldwide still one of the most trafficked illegal drugs. 7 billion probably is estimated, which also means that a lot of law enforcement is needed to enforce the laws that marijuana can't be sold or trafficked at all. And when we looked in Canada at the statistics, there were, I think this was 2011, around 100,013 drug crimes in Canada, and 54% came down to cannabis. And the question was, do we spend our money wisely for cannabis to enforce these laws and block all the judges with possession of cannabis, or is this justified? Yeah? And here other cannabis statistics, how many people, males and females in Canada versus in British Columbia had access to cannabis. There's not such a big difference, I would say, statistically. Here other interesting statistics, who uses cannabis. And for me, very interesting was the blue line. That means the 15 to 17 years old. There seemed not a huge increase, but the biggest increase of users is here, the group I'm in, yeah, the older, and of course the middle-aged group of people who use cannabis. And reasons for this, we will look into this a little bit later. Those were just some statistics, and when before the legalization, they looked around how many people want to have it legalized, and most people in Canada, close to 60%, were supportive of it. Of course, there were around 40% not supporters of it. And I remember my son was at that time in high school, and there were big discussions and about the legalization and what that means. Well, now suddenly the whole high school be high, and yeah. A lot of information is needed that people are not afraid of this, because yeah, since most of us grew up, these substances were on schedules and were not allowed, right? And our parents told us, don't even think about it, right? And the government also, don't even think about it. And there is a lot of myths out there that, for example, when you have dispensaries, that then suddenly the property crime goes up. No, it dropped in Colorado, yeah. And there was no observed cross-sectional association between the density of medical marijuana dispensaries and either violent property crime rates in a study in Great Britain, you know. So there's often a lot of myths which comes out, and when you look into we have to look into the real data, and then we have to look into it. And other important thing is health and social harms. People think that marijuana is very harmful to society, but alcohol is more than twice as harmful as cannabis and 5 times as harmful as other drugs. So alcohol is probably a bigger problem than cannabis. Also, people say, oh, cannabis is the entry drug for heavier drugs. And when we looked also into the statistics, most people tried alcohol first and then came to all the other drugs. And when people tried cannabis first, 40% of people didn't follow up with other drugs after that. So this argument, it is the entry drug for heavier drugs seems to be a myth and not really reality. And here's a very interesting statistic, and that is known since 1994. You know? So what about withdrawal? Now look at it. Alcohol, huge problem with withdrawal. Cannabis, very smaller, much smaller tendency of withdrawal. Then dependence, look at dependence. Nicotine, cigarettes, look at cannabis. So 6-1 dependence. Then intoxication. There, of course, we have intoxication with cannabis, with THC, but look at alcohol again. Much, much higher. Yeah? Heroin. Yeah? And then what else? Addiction potential. There, we have to go to heroin, yeah, and alcohol also. Oops, sorry, I have to go back. Alcohol and heroin, and compare this with cannabis. So I think cannabis is probably one of the most misunderstood plants, medical plants we have, because we can buy alcohol, we can buy caffeine, and look at the statistic between caffeine and cannabis. Only the impairment or the intoxication is higher, really. But when you look at the other parameters, cannabis seems to be not as dangerous as politicians told us all the time it is. And we have a huge problem in all societies, I guess also in Brazil, with abuse of drugs, and many people die. And this brings me here to the opioids. I don't know Brazilian famous people, but you probably have also a long, long list of people who died of opioids and overdoses. You know, here the famous Prince, right? He died of opioid overdose, even when the doctor was with him. Why is that? Opioids, the opioid receptor was much earlier discovered than the endocannabinoid system. And opioids block pain signals, but they also are in the gut. And as we know, as one of the side effects from opioids is that you get constipations when you take them, because it blocks the motility, but also it can block the breathing of people when they have overdoses, and that's why so many people die of it. And now when we look into the opioids and how they developed, the addiction to opioids, we have prescription opioids, they constantly increased from the 2000s, and there was a reason for that, and I come to this in a second. And then we saw suddenly in 2009 a huge increase in heroin use. And that was a reason for that was probably because at that time the FDA enforced new formulations that before that people who were addicted to prescription opioids could extract the opioids out of tablets and could then take them more concentrated. And then the FDA changed this, and formulation had to be changed that you can't extract the opioids anymore from it. And everybody thought when we change the formulation, the problem will disappear because then they can't extract it. No, then people who were addicted went to heroin and later to fentanyl these days. So we solved the problem by not solving it, by making it probably worse, because when we have people who are addicted and they're on prescription drugs, we can probably find the doctors and find the addicted people and help them. And now everybody is in the illegal area, and we have a huge problem, especially with cheap fentanyl from China, which kills lots of people these days. So, and this is the opioids and fentanyl, it's also in this class, and naloxone. Here in Alberta, you can get free kits from naloxone in pharmacies to help people who are addicted. When you have a person at home who's addicted, that you can, when you think they have an overdose, that you can help them. Now, how did it came to this addiction problem? There was one letter to the editor of two people, and they had only two references. One was their own reference, and in 101 words, they said that only very few people got addicted when they were on prescription opioids, and that was the reason why suddenly certain companies began to went into the doctors, told them, prescribe opioids. Here's the reference. People don't get addicted to it. And as we now know, this was all wrong science, wrong information, and this was all based on a 101-word editorial. But I think we have some history with misinformation in medical sciences. This was an advertisement from Bayer about heroin, and they said in the late 1800s, it is safe and non-addictive substitute for morphine. And as we know, that was and is wrong. Yeah. So we have some history of wrong information, not enough sciences, and this is the problem also with cannabis, where we come now back to. We have to study these molecules better and have to understand what is happening here. And the endocannabinoid system was only found in 1988, and we have substances, lipid substances, mediators in our body, which go to certain CBD1 and CBD2 receptors, and also the phytocannabinoids, so THC, can interact with these receptors and have then a reaction. So there's the CB1 and CB2 receptor. The CB1 receptor is more in the central nervous system, and THC reacts with this. THC is extremely lipophilic and can pass the blood-brain barrier and works then in the central nervous system. And then we have the CB2 receptor where CBN works on it, and I will show you something about CBN in a second. And CBD does not fit directly in the one or in the other, but it seems to interact with both of them. And we will review CBD and THC a little bit more in a second. So to the plant by itself, it is the cannabis plant, has male and female plants, and the female plant in its flower has a lot of trichomes. Here the trichomes, and in these trichomes, the cannabinoids are stored, synthesized and stored. And there's a Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and then there's a third one, Cannabis ruderalis, which is not so well known. It's also a much smaller plant. These are the three species. And the difference between hemp and cannabis is just the amount of THC. So if you see hemp seed oil, comes from the same species, but it has less THC content. Now to the THC and to the plant by itself, it is interesting. THC is not really present in cannabis. It is THC acid. This is and CBD acid. Acid is present in the plant and stored, And only through degradation, THC is formed. So THC, I would say, is not even, is not biosynthetically a constituent of the plant. It is a degradation product. And this is a chromatogram of different cannabinoids, which we took in our lab. And when you look then 3D, so the acids have here more UV spectra than, for example, THC or CBD. They have a much shorter, you have not the second or third wave. So biosynthetically, we have CBGA as the precursor, and then out of this can be made the cannabichromane, cannabidiol, so CBD, and also the the CBD. And what happens here when we want to have the THC, we have to decarboxylate the precursors. And this happens when we, for example, heat the substances up. That is why people make hash brownies or smoke it, because the heat will cause that the THC acid decarboxylates, and then you have THC. And only THC is psychoactive. THC acid is not psychoactive. So that means if you have a salad of cannabis, you can eat as much as you want. You will not get high. However, if you take the leaves first or the flowers first and heat them up in the oven for a while, and then you eat it, then you get high. Yeah? So this is also very important to know. And this comes then also to the definitions. The Canadian government got this also early wrong. They said cannabis contains THC and CBD. No, it does not. It contains THC acid and CBD acid. And nowadays they don't have this the definition anymore like this. They say the THC potential and CBD potential. Yeah? So this is there also important to know. So governments don't get everything right. Now to the constituents, CBD, THC, CBN, and so on. What they are, CBN is probably known to be sedative. So we might see in the future some sleep aids with CBN. CBN is also a quality marker for cannabis plants, because when you look here at THC, this here has only one double bond, and here we have aromatic function, and that means if cannabis is stored too long, THC gets into CBN, and that means if you have a high CBN content normally in a plant, that means the plant is probably quite old, or the material is quite old. In this paper I showed you earlier, we also looked into the different products which are on the market, and what part, or what kind of dosage forms they have, tablets, type flowers and solutions and so on, and where these products are at the moment on the market, in which countries. And the other thing which is probably not too well known till today is drug-drug interactions between cannabis and other drugs. And this is one of the things where I'm very critical to the governments, because they told us all the time, don't take these drugs, they are dangerous. And then suddenly they said, now we legalize it and we leave you alone with it. Do whatever you want. Without having enough information, because when we looked into potential drug-drug interactions, we suddenly saw that THC and CBD, and also when it's inhaled, will interact with certain enzymes, metabolic enzymes. And what does this mean? Could there be drug-drug interactions? So could there be, when we take CBD and THC, a positive effect, a synergistic effect, or a negative effect? And we looked into it first with software simulations and to get some ideas about it. And here we saw that a lot of CYPs are interacting with THC, acid, CBD, and THC, so different enzymes, and that means we probably can, when we have THC, CBD present, we might increase the plasma levels of other drugs because they compete with the excretion. So first to THC, what we found there. THC, when we looked into the database of Medscape and looked at Marinol, which is a synthetic THC product, there were 82 serious interactions left. 2 drugs listed as serious and 82 were listed as monitor closely because of drug-drug interactions. It means there are contraindications. And if we have a contraindication for a drug, then we probably have also contraindications when we take the herb of it, because it has the same molecule in it. Interesting also is that cannabidiol capsules, so THC capsules, are for a long time already in the United States pharmacopoeia as a monograph, but legally it's not allowed to have THC in the United States. So interesting. So THC affects also the motility. That means we can have for certain drugs delayed absorption. For example, for pentobarbital, was shown THC binds to plasma proteins. That means it could, when we have a high enough dose, that protein binding of other drugs could be lower. And there could be then also what we looked into it, pharmacodynamic interaction. That means directly at the receptor interactions, but also pharmacokinetic interaction. That means with the enzymes that when other drugs don't get metabolized as fast. And when you look here at the antidepressants, amphetamines, cocaine, atropine. So there is a whole list of drugs where we have pharmacodynamic interactions, but then we have also valproate here, for example, or antipurine, barbiturates, where these drugs can have pharmacokinetic interaction. That means the pharmacokinetics could be positive or negatively impacted. CBD, now we have to look into that, and THC normally a dose of 10 milligrams and you don't get up from the couch for the next 4 hours. CBD is always, or is seen by many people as the good cannabinoid because it doesn't make you high, so it must be good. However, when we now look into potential interactions, then we saw suddenly the interactions between CBD and drugs can be even much more common than for THC. And the doses people take are much higher. So people sometimes take 400 milligrams or more of CBD. And they don't get high, so they think, oh, more can help more, but more can also mean more drug-drug interactions. And when you look here, calcium channel blockers, benzodiazepine, cyclosporin, so many drugs, antihistamines here, statins, they can be impacted by CBD, and people don't know it. And we have no real indication, no real education about it, right? So other important interaction is warfarin, for your blood thinner. And you take a lot of CBD, your warfarin levels go up, and then your blood clotting is not anymore working. So people came into the hospital because of this. So CBD is, I think, when you take other drugs, dangerous. You have to know about these interactions. We have some other groups of drugs which might have interactions with CBD, and ketoconazole, rifampicin. There could be significant interactions either in the one or in the other directions. We summarized this in, I think, 2019 or 2020, we summarized this as in a review paper of the drug-drug interactions, and there you can find all more detailed information about this. In summary, cannabis, I think, is an important medical plant. It has, the cannabinoids have normally not the synthetic ones, the modern synthetic ones not, but there's natural phytocannabinoids have a large safety margin. The majority of cannabinoids are not narcotics. They don't make you high. THC, yeah, I would say is still psychoactive and probably could be classified as a narcotic if you wish, but as we now saw, politicians think we are allowed to get now high on this stuff. Cannabis was classified as a narcotic when it not much was known about its molecular and pharmacological action, or the existing evidence was ignored due to wrong reasons, as I think. Yeah, is cannabis still on Schedule 1 in the United States? Cannabis has many advantages over opioids when it comes to pain. You can't kill somebody probably with cannabis, but opioids, many people died. And that means we need research to investigate possible medical uses of cannabis, and drug-drug interactions need to be considered, and we have to educate our pharmacists, our doctors about this. In conclusion, we need to educate decision makers, politicians, judges, law enforcement. We need to educate scientists and health professionals, and we need to educate the public at large about this plant. With that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I hope you have some questions for me. So, what can I do here?
Okay, Arthur. Anna, who is going to mediate the questions? Arthur, I think you already have a question, Reimann. Okay, Reimann, we already have. Okay, Reimann, we all have in the yes, you're ready. 2 questions. Okay.
Yeah, I begin. So from Arthur, what do you think about the future of drug targeting? Yeah, I think the endocannabinoid system is an extremely interesting system. And we need, and it will open probably the doors for new pain therapies. So it is extremely interesting. Maybe the cannabinoids are not the best molecules to use for that, because they are extremely lipophilic and extremely sensitive. So cannabinoids are light sensitive, oxidative sensitive. So maybe we find better molecules than the cannabinoids, but it's a good start. I mean, we know how THC works. We know now much better also how CBD works, but there's still a big problem with oral delivery, because they also go into the lymphatic system because they are so lipophilic, and we don't measure anything in the lymphatic system these days. So I think cannabis research is very interesting. Industry has lost a little bit the interest in it, I guess, because everybody thought there's the gold rush and we will have thousands of new products, and the only one we got was a CBD product for epilepsy. That was the only new product besides THC which came on the market in the last 5 years probably. We have a lot of snake oil products sold everywhere with a lot of claims, but nobody ever had made the clinical trial to show that these claims are right. Yeah. So a lot of research, and I think the endocannabinoid system is a very interesting, pharmacologically interesting target. If the cannabinoids are always the best for that, not so sure. We might find something which is easier to deliver, or if we find new drug targeting, as Dr. Chakra said. Home cultivation. Yeah, in Canada, we are allowed, everybody is allowed to have 4 plants in your garden or house, wherever you want to have it. And yeah, I know some of our neighbors, they cultivate their own cannabis plants, and why not? I mean, so this is, for me, I have no problem with it. I never tried it, and personally, But if people have relief through cannabis, why not? It is, as we saw, it is much safer than many other medications. But we just have to know also about these drug-drug interactions. This is very, very important. So what is the impact of the introduction in the market of cannabis to the pharmaceutical companies that produce medicines? Yeah, I haven't seen any statistics about that, but I mean, everybody thought that suddenly when we legalized marijuana that the whole country is stoned, and that didn't happen. I mean, I know from Germany, the public insurer in certain circumstances will even pay for cannabis use for certain diseases. Here in Canada, our public insurer will not, that's for sure. So if you want to have cannabis as a drug, you really have to go down the road of clinical trials. And then when a clinical product is approved, then maybe the public insurer can consider to reimburse. I've heard that some insurance companies, private insurance companies, reimburse for cannabis. So this is exactly the situation where I'm so mad on the politicians. They told us since the 70s, don't even think about it. And then suddenly in 2018, they said, and now do whatever you want. And nobody had enough information. And we have now to figure it out by ourselves. And that was probably not a wise thing. They should have made much more research, but they restricted research extremely a lot. And then when they legalized marijuana, to get a research license, it was quite complex and took a long time for people who wanted a new license. It took very, very long. Since I had my license already since 2005, I was transferred to it, and they gave me for 1 year a provisional license, and then I had to apply again to get my real license. So they made it more complicated than it is probably justified. And what really made me smile a lot, before the cannabis was legalized, I could have cannabis and opium in my safe. And after cannabis was legalized, I had to put the cannabis in its own safe and the controlled substance in the other safe. I was not allowed to have both in the same safe. Yeah, so as politicians. Any other questions?
So you had to buy 2 safes.
I bought 4 safes. Because we have 4 safes because we also wanted to have a precursor license, and then the precursor can't be also mixed with the other things. So we have now a precursor license, we have a controlled substance license, and we have a cannabis license. So ask the politicians why, you know. It's just one of these things where you smile, but the cost involved were significant. So it was around $20,000 to upgrade the system. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would be, how would work here in Brazil if the professors could have, you know, this kind of substance in their labs.
So you probably have also to have a safe and everything and an alarm system. But I saw, interestingly, I think magic mushrooms are legal to have in Brazil.
Yeah, I think mushrooms is okay. Yeah.
The politicians told us here, don't even touch it, and it's still controlled substances. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, let's see if we have more questions. No more questions? The audience, I think it's quiet by now, Reimer. Anna, do you think that we can finish our meeting? Oh, we already have the certificates, a link for the certificates. Please, guys, be aware, your certificates, we already have the link, okay? And, Ana, o que você... Ana, a gente termina agora, Ana? Cadê a Ana?
Eu estou aqui, professora.
Oi, linda. O que a gente... Então, acho que a gente pode encerrar.
Não temos mais dúvidas, ninguém tem mais dúvidas, a senhora não quer fazer mais nenhuma pergunta para o professor Heimer?
Uhum. Não, acho que não, Ana. Eu converso com o professor Heimer todo dia.
Então, não tem dúvida para passar para os alunos?
Não, acho que ele já respondeu as 3 questões, né?
Uhum.
Ok.
Acredito que a senhora pode encerrar.
Okay. So if you have no more questions, then we can release Professor Reimer. Reimer, what time? What's the time in Canada? 3 hours? We are
10 to 10.
10 to 10? Okay, you are behind us. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so people are congratulating you. Congratulations, Professor Reimer. Thank you. I think they love it, Reimer. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful lecture about cannabis. I always love to watch your lecture about cannabis. You know, I think we learn a lot. I think it's important to clarify, Reimer, to educate people. And this kind of meeting, I think, help us a lot on this.
And remember, we are pharmacists. We research drugs, right? And we don't care what kind of drugs. Any drug.
Yeah.
This is also important to know. We need more research in any kind of these drugs, independent what politicians in the 70s told us.
In the 70s, yes, I totally agree. And as we are telling in the beginning, you know, if you have the proper drug delivery, all the toxicity, all the you know, the problems you can avoid. You can at least overcome some of these important, you know, adverse effects if you have the proper drug delivery. I think the pharmacist should empower, you know, this. I totally agree with you, Reimer. So if you have no questions, then we can finish. We can release Professor Reimer. Reimer, thank you so much. I hope, Reimer, you'll be with us, you know, in presence, you know, with your body, you know, real body. You know?
I hope I can come. I mean, COVID got now so much better, so that we travel again.
Yeah, I hope. Thank you so much, Reimer. Thank you very much.
Afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Professor.